ABBA hated this song. The fans loved it. And when the single was released, the BBC was reluctant to play it on the radio. Some producers believed they had heard something rather inappropriate in the lyrics.
Summer Night City was a nightmare to record. Bjorn, Benny, and ABBA's sound engineer Michael Trato were completely exhausted by the song. One day it sounded too fast. The next day it sounded too slow. The production felt too thin, then too crowded. Agnetha and Frida didn't like it at first either. Frida especially felt that Summer Night City simply wasn't an ABBA song. Waiting for the sunrise, soul dancing in the dark, walking in the moonlight, love-making in the park. Those lyrics raised eyebrows among some guardians of public morality, especially at the BBC.
I was invited to the BBC to discuss the matter, recalled ABBA's British promotion partner, Judd Lander. The first thing they asked me was, "Are they singing F***ing in the Moonlight? We can't put that on the air." I denied it, but even I felt uneasy at the thought that Bjorn and Benny might actually have decided to play a joke on everyone. An argument followed.
Meanwhile, while Lander was being grilled at the BBC, Bjorn and Benny were in America on business. Among other things, they managed to arrange a meeting with their longtime idol, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. They were excited about the meeting, but when it finally took place, Bjorn and Benny were shocked. This was not the Brian Wilson they knew from Beach Boys records. He spent most of the meeting sitting silently in his chair and only occasionally made a few sounds.
Lander, however, eventually managed to convince the BBC producers not to ban the song over their suspicions about obscene language. Ironically, a ban might have had the opposite effect. More than once, songs had become hits precisely because they had been banned. At the beginning of 1978, when work on the track started, the movie Saturday Night Fever and the music of the Bee Gees were everywhere. Benny later admitted that their success had inspired him while working on Summer Night City. The song itself was a tribute to Stockholm. But despite all that inspiration, Bjorn and Benny simply couldn't turn it into the record they wanted to hear.
And time was running out. ABBA's American partners at Atlantic Records were expecting a new single from the upcoming album as soon as possible, followed by the album itself. The problem was that neither was ready. In fact, ABBA hadn't released a new international single in more than 6 months. So Summer Night City was released in what the band themselves considered an unfinished state.
"You never release a song that you think is completely worthless," Benny once said. But a year or two later, you may still find yourself thinking, "We shouldn't have released that one." Bjorn went even further. He later described Summer Night City as really lousy.
The song originally began with the words, "End of night, a new day dawning, and the first birds start to sing. In the pale light of the morning, nothing's worth remembering. It's a dream. It's out of reach, like scattered driftwood on the beach."
This opening section was slow and melodic, but from the very beginning, they wanted the song to have a fast, driving rhythm. That is why this beautiful introduction was performed only in concert. For the studio version of the song, the entire section was cut. Trato opposed the decision, but the final say belonged to Bjorn and Benny. It was rather silly, because anyone who knows anything about recording can hear that there's been an edit, Michael later recalled.
"In the sun, I feel like sleeping. I can't take it for too long. My impatience slowly creeping up my spine and growing strong. I know what's waiting there for me. Tonight I'm loose and fancy-free. Here, a desire to escape everyday problems for a while and lose oneself in the atmosphere of nightlife and the dance floor is reflected."
Interestingly, ABBA also had a song that looked at nightlife from the opposite perspective, through the eyes of the city itself. In the song Tiger, the city warns about the dangers of nightlife.
ABBA's manager, Stig Anderson, was furious. "How many? 20 records?" he shouted into the phone. Give them 10, and that's it. Like hell they're getting any more ABBA from me. Stig slammed down the receiver and, narrowing his eyes, went back to studying the Summer Night City chart reports.
One major record retailer decided to order only 20 copies of the new single. He had once misjudged the sales potential of ABBA, the album, and now preferred to play it safe. But the records sold out almost immediately. The very next day, he placed a much larger order. Later, the retailer recalled, "We had to wait an unusually long time because Stig decided to get back at us. He could be rather touchy about things like that. Everyone in the music business knew it."
Stig stared at the mockingly tiny print. United Kingdom, number 21. Sweden, number 3. His eyes quickly scanned the list in search of Australia. The secretary walked into the office. "Who on earth puts these reports together?" Stig asked, irritably. For some reason, Australia was at the very bottom of the list. 57th, he read aloud slowly and leaned back in his chair.
It would be unfair to say that Summer Night City got off to a bad start, but the old sense of euphoria was gone. In the United Kingdom, the song eventually climbed to number 5, the first ABBA single in several years that failed to reach even the top 3. In Australia, once considered one of the group's most loyal markets, Summer Night City debuted at number 57 and ultimately rose only to number 13. Yes, the song still reached number 1 in Sweden and comfortably made the top 10 in several other countries, but Bjorn and Benny were looking elsewhere. What mattered most to them were the United Kingdom and the United States. For the first time in a long while, an uncomfortable thought began to emerge. What if their peak was already behind them?
Summer Night City became the first song recorded at the new Polar studio. It was here that Bjorn, Benny, and Michael Tretow finally had access to all the equipment they had previously only dreamed of. But even the new studio failed to solve their biggest problem. Bjorn and Benny still weren't satisfied with the result. In the end, they even decided not to include Summer Night City on ABBA's new album, Voulez-Vous.
But that was not the end of the Summer Night City story. The song performed respectably in the charts, but nowhere near as well as ABBA had hoped. It seemed that Summer Night City would remain one of the most troublesome recordings in the group's history. But ABBA fans had a different opinion. It was a rare case where the group and its fans never managed to agree. From the very beginning, Bjorn considered Summer Night City a terrible record. Many ABBA fans, on the other hand, continue to regard it as a masterpiece.
September 11th, 1978. Stig Anderson's office.
Stig was disappointed. Even ABBA's American partners had been convinced that Summer Night City would be a massive success. It didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And the new album was running late as well. The charts no longer looked as welcoming as they once had. But Stig was far too experienced to panic. He understood perfectly well that in the music business, as in life, there are successes and failures. The only thing to do was keep working.
ABBA still had a new album, new hits, and new achievements ahead of them. And as for Summer Night City, its finest hour would come later. Just not in 1978. Subscribe for more stories about ABBA.